Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. Today on Farm Here Daily, we're going to go over southern rust with Alison Robertson, talk about the pathology of the disease and how that may affect production. Then we'll chat about a potential transcontinental rail system and how that may affect grain shipping with Soy Transportation Coalition Director Mike Steenhoek. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, making sure folks are informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Alison Robertson. She is an ISU Extension plant pathologist. Alison, thank you so much for joining me on Farm Here Daily. I'm really excited to talk to you because there's a less exciting thing going on around the state, but important to talk about, and that is southern rust. We haven't really seen this in the state before, and it's popped up this year. What's going on with that? What do we know so far from a pathologist perspective?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, David. And so southern rust, actually we do tend to see it most years in Iowa. It'll come up here. This will be my 21st growing season here. So every year we see a little bit of southern rust. But you're correct in that it hasn't really been a big issue during those years. And but this year it has come in earlier than it normally does. So in most years, we'll see southern rust come in around about August, and you'll see a little bit of it here and there in the field, but it doesn't really develop into anything. But this year, we had reports of southern rust coming in the middle of July, which actually we had reports of southern rust coming in the middle of July last year. Last year, I blamed it on Tropical Storm Beryl. This year, we haven't had a tropical storm bringing moisture up here into Iowa. But from talking with our meteorologists, we have had a lot of southerly winds. And so the thing to remember about rust is that that pathogen cannot survive here in the Midwest. It survives down in the South, in Central America, and then it gets blown up here every year.
And in terms of the moisture, that's important because this can ride on the droplets that are going through the airstream.
So that I'm glad you brought that up. So first of all, the spores just get picked up in the air and they'll just get carried in the air currents. The moisture is very important because those leaves, when those spores, the seeds of that pathogen land on the leaves, those leaves have to be wet for at least 6 hours to give those spores time to germinate and infect the leaves. And so with southern rust, when we have a lot of moisture, that's when the disease can build up very quickly. And that's something I saw last year in one of my trials where we had irrigation. We had a severe development of southern rust in that trial. From my perspective, it was awesome. But yes, so that's the biggest concern at the moment is it's come up early. We're at the beginning of grainfill and we have a lot of moisture in the state. And so this is one of those diseases that can develop incredibly quickly. And therefore, it's a little bit of a concern. I've never been in this position before in the 21 years that I've been here, right? So I don't know what to expect.
What type of damage does this disease do to crops? I've heard someone describe it as making them crispy.
Yeah, that's, so it'll come in, it'll infect the leaf, and then what it'll do is it'll produce these pustules on the leaf, kind of like little pimples that burst open, right, and release the spores. And so first of all, you get the photosynthetic area of the leaf is damaged. The plant can't photosynthesize very efficiently. And then the second thing is by ripping open that epidermis, probably we're letting moisture escape there. And so those plants, I mean, this year it's pretty good because we've got a lot of moisture, right? But yes, those leaves will eventually just dry up, and the plant will die.
When you say lets out spores, is this more of a fungal disease that we're talking about, or not bacteria when you discuss
Yes.
that?
So it's a fungus, and it's a fungus that can only survive on green tissue, and that's why we don't see we that's why we don't the fungus will not survive here in Iowa, right? Because there's no green tissue here in January or February.
Right.
But yes, it is a fungus. So in some ways, that's good news because we can control fungal diseases. We can't control bacterial diseases.
When then you're dealing with the fungal disease, another concern I've heard with this is that corn is so big, it's so tall, that it's hard to apply it on lower leaves. So you will have this inoculation happen where you can remove the disease from the top of the plants, but you'll have the lower leaves reinfecting after a time. Is that true?
Um, mm, so when I've done fungicide work, and I know that Darren Mueller, my colleague, has done fungicide work, and so we know that when you're applying fungicides to the canopy, that those fungicides will get most of the fungicide in the top of the canopy, but we will get that fungicide down into the middle of the canopy. And then, yes, once we get to that lower canopy is not receiving as much fungicide as the middle and the upper canopy, right? But also, we need to remember that it's only the middle and the upper canopy that are contributing the yield, that are filling the grain, right? And so, yes, we can have disease developing in the bottom there, but if we get that fungicide on and protect that ear leaf and above, then even though we have spores down there in the bottom of the canopy, if those spores land on a leaf that received fungicide, they're not going to be able to germinate and infect that leaf. That leaf is protected for 3 to 5 weeks, depending on what product you use.
I was a little worried I was putting the cart before the horse before that question in general, and that is fungicide the only way to deal with rust during this stage of development?
Yes. So the only way we can control rust is by applying a fungicide. And really, when we think about disease management, the cornerstone of any disease management should be planting a resistant variety or hybrid in this case, seeing as how we're talking about corn. And most of the seed companies do not publish their southern rust resistance for their hybrids. So we don't know what hybrids are resistant or not. So yes, right now, all we have is fungicides.
Based on the information that we have, is this something that Iowa farmers should be preparing more for? Or is this going to be just a once in a while when the right weather conditions have it?
Great question. I wish I could answer it. I guess time will tell, right? We're having these extreme weather events, and these extreme weather events are bringing things up from the south that we don't have a history of having here in Iowa. And so if we continue to have these extreme weather events, then yes, southern rust could become an issue for Iowa farmers. But it's very difficult to say now, right? Maybe if you ask me that question in 10 years' time when I'm retiring and you're saying goodbye to me, I might be able to answer that question. But right now, it's very difficult to say.
So as we move forward through August, we, are barely finishing up July here. what's a farmer to do? What is the thing to look out for as we approach this specific disease of southern rust?
The best place to go for information is to go to the Crop Protection Network website, which is Crop Protection Network, or one word, .org. And on that website, there is a link to maps, and you can go to the Southern Rust map. So first of all, that will tell you where in Iowa southern rust has been reported. And those counties where it's been reported are colored in red. I color them in. So if your county is not colored in, it's just that I don't have a report from that county, and people are willing to email me and just let me know, right? I need a photo for verification. But the other thing about going to that map is that map has a really neat table at the top of it, which talks about spraying a fungicide, right? And so if you sprayed a fungicide around about tasseling, silking, depending on the product you use, you may need to go back with a second application of a fungicide. But once we start, spraying that fungicide R2, R3, a second application is not going to be necessary. And once again, depending on your product. So also at the Crop Protection Network website, you can also look for the fungicide efficacy on corn diseases. And that gives you a chart of all the products that are registered for use on corn. And it will tell you, it'll rank those products, or it'll at least tell you whether those products are poor, good, very good to excellent against southern rust, right? And that'll give you an idea. If you've already sprayed, well, then you'll know how that product performs. If you haven't sprayed yet and you're intending to spray, then you can choose one of the better products, right? If that fits your wallet. So I would start there, go to that resource. And another thing that they also have at the Crop Protection Network is a corn fungicide ROI, return on investment calculator. So that's another thing that you could use, plug in your fungicide, plug in your corn price, plug in some other variables and see whether it's going to be worth that input. I've been saying this summer, for every input, there should be an output, right? And so this is a great tool to see whether you're going to get an output, a return on that. And then the other thing is scout, right? So get into your fields, and you have to get into the field, not just the end rows, but get into the field and have a look and see what's happening in the field. And then talk to your local extension person. If you have questions, email me or Darren Mueller, and we can help and give some advice.
Alison, before I let you go, I wanted, and I'd like to talk to you again about some of this stuff, but I'd like to just have a final note here. Do you think that southern rust is the most pressing disease of Iowa this summer, or is there something else for us to talk about later down the road, other disease-wise?
I think that southern rust is the disease that I have the most concern about at the moment. It's wet, it's hot, perfect conditions for southern rust. Yes, we have tar spot out there. Tar spot doesn't really like wet conditions, at least, when we think about the model that we developed. Northern corn leaf blight likes wet conditions, a little bit too warm for northern corn leaf blight. And then gray leaf spot, great conditions for gray leaf spot. We've seen gray leaf spot in that lower canopy, but it doesn't seem to be doing very much at the moment. And southern rust will develop way more quickly than gray leaf spot. So for southern rust, from a spore to land on a leaf, infect and produce more spores, takes about 5 to 7 days. With gray leaf spot, for that same cycle, that's about 14 days. So southern rust is going to develop a lot quicker than gray leaf spot. And southern gray leaf spot, we have pretty good resistance in our hybrids. Southern rust, we're kind of in the dark there. So yes, to me, southern rust is the biggest concern. And maybe it's because I don't have as much experience with southern rust than the other diseases, right? So, but yes, there's lots of things out there. Get out in your field and see what spots you have.
Alison Robertson is an ISU Extension field pathologist. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily. We'll definitely have to follow up later this summer and see where things are.
Yep. Thanks for having me, David.
This is Farm Here Daily. We'll have more conversations on the way, but first we're going to take a look at the marketplace. And there was a close in the red at the Tuesday end of the day session. September corn 4.5 cents weaker, 3.89 1/4. December falling 3 cents, 4.11. Soybeans in August 7 cents down at 9.81 3/4, with September falling 3 cents, 9.89 1/2. Soybean meal in August $3.20 a ton in the red at $261.70. September wheat 8 3/4 down at 5.29 3/4, with December falling 8 3/4 at 5.50 even. In the livestock market close for Tuesday, August live cattle up $1.85 a hundredweight, $229.72. October $1.67 more at $226.45. Feeder cattle in August $2.67 a hundredweight higher at $336.20, with September rising $2.52 at $337.07. Lean hogs in August down $1.27 a hundredweight at $107.25, with October falling $2.15 at $88.72 a hundredweight. That is the Tuesday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Mike Steenhoek. He is the Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily. And we're here to talk about a recent announcement. In fact, I believe it was today. There were rumors, but today it was announced that there was a potential deal between Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific to have a transcontinental rail. Is that correct that we just learned that?
We did. And so this was over a week ago that the Wall Street Journal first broke the story that negotiations were occurring in between the two railroads. And so certainly that unleashed a bunch of discussion about the prospects for something like this. And then, during the course of this week, we did hear official statements from both the Union Pacific and the Norfolk Southern that they have reached an agreement and they are proceeding along this path. Now, this is something that's going to take a considerable amount of time for it to come to fruition. There are significant regulatory hurdles that need to be addressed, including before the Surface Transportation Board. The Department of Justice will clearly be involved in this, as well as members of Congress. So this really is kind of that first step, but the two railroads announced that is their intention, and that's something that they're going to pursue, is a merger of these two major railroads.
So lots of hurdles to be had for sure, including having the merger even approved. But what does this transcontinental rail even mean for grain farmers across the country?
Well, the railroads and agriculture have a long history, and really, you can't be successful in agriculture without having a quality rail transportation network. And agriculture in turn has been a significant business line and customer for the rail industry for many years. So the two industries have a real strong linkage, and sometimes it's been very beneficial. Other times there's been a healthy degree of conflict, and that just goes back for many, many decades. The things that history does teach us, and the rail industry is one among many, but certainly a very vibrant example where there's been a lot of consolidation, a lot of aggregation, mergers, acquisitions for many years. And it's kind of a rule that when you have that kind of activity, sometimes the benefits of that accrue disproportionately. Sometimes those benefits accrue disproportionately to the owners, And sometimes it's a combination of the two. But one of the things that we have seen numerous mergers and acquisitions and consolidations in the past is that it does disrupt and change that kind of competitive relationship between railroads and their customers. And for agriculture, what we want is for as many transportation providers, including railroads, to be competing for our business. That's good for us when we have that dynamic occurring. And so one of the things that does concern us is when all of a sudden you are reducing the number of transportation providers that will be competing for our business, is that can result in a decrease in service, less reliability, or increased freight rates. And I think it's important to keep that in mind and allow that history to inform us as we proceed. It doesn't always happen, but it's something that has clearly occurred in the past. And so you're going to hear a lot of rail customers that are going to express that in the agricultural side, particularly. But then on the other hand, I fully expect that they're the proponents of this acquisition or merger, and also potentially some shippers, maybe even some agricultural shippers, will talk about that it could result in a more seamless, service from one area of the country to the next. Because one of the fundamental realities within supply chains, it's kind of a supply chain 101 concept, is that whenever you have a handoff, and whether that handoff occurs from one mode of transportation to the next, say truck to rail or truck to barge or barge to that can result in increased costs. One of the things that freight does not like to do is it doesn't like to get handed off. It doesn't like to be kind of treated like a baton going around. The more you can minimize or mitigate handoffs, that usually bodes well for the quality of your transportation network, your supply chain. It'll be more seamless. It'll be more cost effective. And so I fully anticipate you're going to hear those kind of comments as well. And so I think the wise place to be, the prudent place to be, is to kind of have some healthy degree of skepticism. Understand that this is a deal that has a significant order of magnitude that will have significant ripple effects throughout not only the rail industry, but other transportation modes, as well as the customers that are served by the rail industry as well. And understand that that's kind of been the reality in the past, and so allowing that to inform our posture as we move forward. So this is something that's of significant interest and consequence to agriculture, and so it's something that we're going to be very engaged in as we proceed.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask, that was one of the first things that struck me, was this has been promoted as the first and the only transcontinental rail. And while that may present some really great opportunities, the only rail suggests that there isn't competition for a similar service. And is there concerns on a monopoly of just one rail line through the entire country that no one else can compete with because there just is no other thing to compete with?
Well, I think an important context, a broader context that's really important to keep in mind as we digest and discuss this merger between these two, Pacific and North Southern, is that if this is allowed to succeed, it would create almost an inevitable kind of momentum, an inexorable kind of momentum for the other two railroads, enough, and CSX to also merge. Those two railroads would realize that they are now at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis coast to coast, Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern. And so there would be significant encouragement and momentum for those two railroads to follow suit. So I think one of the things that's going to happen as we proceed is, the regulators, like the Surface Transportation Board, like the Department of Justice, like members of Congress, is that they're not going to look at this potential deal in isolation as something that just has consequence to these two parties. They're going to look at it more broadly, and they're going to almost see it as a package deal that to allow, and if they do allow merger or acquisition to occur, it will result in a subsequent merger or acquisition to occur between those two remaining railroads. And so at the end of the day, it could result in two U.S.-based Class 1 railroads that both, and then of course, then what would happen with two Canadian railroads, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City, that have significant trackage in the United States. So it's going to be something that not only the regulators but all railroad stakeholders, both the providers of rail service and also as customers, are going to look at it through more of that broad lens.
While there are the concerns of consolidation, you also mentioned there are possibilities of reduction of costs. And we know input costs are a huge problem for grain farmers as folks just get less and less of the food dollar every year, it seems. What are some of those transportation costs, especially in exports, that might be expected with a merger like this?
Well, I think the big one is it is a reality, whether you support this potential merger or you are actually opposed to it. It is a reality that there is a healthy amount of congestion between, particularly in the Chicago area, but other areas in the United States where there is this handoff between one of the eastern railroads, which those again are CSX and Norfolk Southern, and one of the western railroads, which is Union Pacific and BNSF. So those handoffs do occur, and to varying degrees, they are expensive and they result in a decrease in service. There's always this kind of aspiration to try to avoid the Chicago area when it comes to moving freight on the rail network, and so that is a reality. And it's pretty unanimous that there's a desire to try to mitigate that kind of congestion and those inefficiencies. And so that's something that we'll be looking at. To what extent will that result in any kind of increased service or more reliable service or more economical service? And that's something that the regulators are going to look at. The big things that the kind of the lens that one of the major lenses that they look through these kind of transitions is, will it increase competition within the rail network? Will it increase service to customers, including agricultural customers? So that's something that's we're all going to be looking at very earnestly to see if this particular transaction will result in like that.
Mike Steenhoek is the Soy Transportation Coalition Executive Director, joining us on Farm Here Daily. Thanks so much, Mike, for your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Take care anytime.
This is Farm Here Daily. Thank you so much again for listening. Please, we would love to have you join our community, so like and follow the podcast and check out our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.